Hey guys, today we will have a look at the front lever, as this was a common question: when to start and where to start. Before starting with your first progression, we always need a status quo. So I'm showing that just as an example. Ideally, we already are able to reach a 90 tucked position, as otherwise if it is smaller, we are flexing the spine, which simply then differs a little. If you're not able to reach that 90 for at least, let's say, 5 seconds, my clear recommendation is to first focus on some basic strength exercises, increasing pull-ups, increasing your lat strength in general. This doesn't need to be 100% specific. Simply increasing lat strength, increasing a little bit of core strength, and so on. Once this has happened, then we retest it. We retest the exercise, like I've just shown. That's always step number one. Part two now is the technique. Ideally, we start with a correct technique from the early beginning, simply as it is easier to work with constant variables, also to identify if we actually progress. Okay, so I go through all those things. The first variable, let's start with the elbows. We always want to have locked out elbows. Means that we don't start to bend, to not pull. Important to understand. It will naturally happen often that the shoulders roll forward, that you shorten the lever from here to here, simply as the body wants to make it as easy as possible. And the shorter the distance, obviously, the closer the joint is towards the base or towards the bar in that kind of sense, the easier it will be. Hence, we need to counterwork that. Okay? How we do that is by conscious effort to think of it. Like, tips can be to break the bar into two pieces, also to do something like a pullover. That always extremely helps. Super vital is that you film yourself. Only then you can judge, okay, elbows are fine. A recommendation is, as we now go also through the other points which are important, don't try to think on all different aspects at once. Always try to think on maybe one or maximally 2 points to improve. Because if you go into the hold at first and think of, okay, I want to lock out my elbows with that cue, but also at the same time, I want to have the correct chest position, hip position, and so on, that will be overwhelming and will lead probably to nothing. So totally okay if, for example, at the beginning, the hip position is then not correct, or the chest position, but your intent, the elbows, they are good, and that's what matters. Because you will see after a few days of training, it becomes more and more automatic with the elbows that you don't have to think of it, and it is simply there. And then it's time for the next point. Okay? And the next point is our shoulder position, which should be depressed, that will be elevated, depressed, and neutral. So what we try to avoid is, again, shoulder too much into protraction. This is a natural thing which might happen, again, because it shortens the way, the lever towards the bar. Also, super important to stabilize the shoulder girdle. Depression. Try to avoid elevation. This is probably one of the key points. Also here again, this tip of leg pull down might help a little. That's about that. Often you hear people telling you need to retract. Definitely not, because on the one hand it will not be possible to fully retract, and also there is no real sense behind it, because the legs, which are the primary mover or primary muscle group, we don't have the function of they don't have the function of retraction. So yeah, for me the understanding is a straight line with joint alignment, but retraction definitely not. Yeah, that's about that. Then the hip's not that difficult, to be honest. You either aim for a neutral or maybe slightly for a slight posterior pelvic tilt. What helps here is that you imagine that the belly button pushes towards your lower back. That engages a bit more the abdominal muscles. No other than that, that shouldn't be that much of an issue. What will take some time is that you find the right height. This is more like an awareness thing. Let's say some might be like this, some like this. But like mentioned, this will be an awareness thing. Once again, filming, super vital. Okay? Now let's have a look at the different progressions and what our milestones. First progression is, like we have seen already, the 90 tuck. Goal here is to reach around at the end then, let's say 8 to 12 seconds for multiple sets. Let's say week 1 we do 3 or 4 sets on a certain day with 8 to 12 seconds. Then we have kind of accomplished this goal. I will say something towards the planning at the end. So first, the progressions. When we have achieved that, we move on, partly at least, to a harder progression. Always a new harder progression we can establish once we are able to hold it at least for, let's say, around 4 seconds, for maybe 2 sets at least. So the new harder progression is simply an open advanced tuck. So there will be 90, and there will be open like 110 degree. This is the only progression which is a little more difficult to measure, which I'm not a fan of, but we don't have a better option. Means it's not the progression will not always be 100% the same, as we can't hit the same lever precisely, but it will still work. And then it can look like, okay, we do 2 sets of the harder progression to already get used to it a little. Let's say 2 sets of 4 seconds or 3 seconds, and then we add volume with the easy progression from before. And that's how we try to more and more establish this harder progression, until also here we substituted more sets of the easier progression through the harder progression, and again build this up to, let's say, around 8, 10, 12 seconds. And then we can already try to establish a little bit of that one leg 90 front lever. Definitely a huge fan of that one, and this is again a progression which we can copy and paste. It looks totally the same. A 90 one leg front leg is always a 90 one leg front leg. From my experience with the athletes in coaching, but also back then for myself, there might be a progression necessary in between. So jumping from the open towards the free one leg is often a bit too difficult. Hence, my recommendation is that you start next to your open at once tucked, that you start implementing a few sets of banded one leg. I'm not a fan of just relying on bands, but here it can make sense. The goal here is to use a super light band, just as supportive that you're able to get again 3 to 5 seconds. Once we reach here again, we build it up in terms of seconds. Same story, 8 to 10 seconds, multiple working sets. We can slowly implement the free one. Free one leg. Just a demonstration again with 90. Once this is good, we open it more. So that the midfoot is here on knee level. Once we are at knee level, we can start that the heel of the foot is now on knee level, not the midfoot, now the heel. Now we would have this progression. If this progression is again up to the mentioned hold time, we can progress with tip of the toe against ankle. I really like this progression scheme because it's super strict, super clear, and no room for questions. No doubt there are multiple ways to get towards the front lever, but this is out of my experience, not personally, not just on myself, more so with all my athletes, the best way. Of course, it can make sense to implement half-lay front lever at a certain point, but experience-wise, this is a very good method. And once we reach like this tip of the toe on the ankle with like 8 to 10 seconds, you should already be able to pull off a front lever for a few seconds. Okay? That's pretty much it about the progressions. Now it would be important, of course, to know how to train it. Here I like to focus on specific training, which should be a majority of your training. Specific training means we want to reach the front lever, so we're training the front lever. Next to that, we have accessory training. Accessory training means that we strengthen muscles which are used in the front lever additionally. This point eventually is not necessary for everyone, but in my experience, definitely a good add-on. For example, day one, we do 3 sets of the more advanced progression, let's say 3 to 5 seconds, then 2 sets of an easier progression, 8 to 10 seconds, and our second exercise is then pull-ups. We build up more strength in pull-ups, weighted pull-ups. Let's say 3 times 5 to 6 repetitions, and we try to constantly add more weight. That's an example of one day. Let's say Monday, Wednesday, we say we do an easier progression. We just do the easier holds, or we can bring in also dynamic variations like a front lever raise and so on, which I can show after. For example, doing 3 sets of front lever raise to hold, followed by a rowing motion. For example, 4 sets of 6 reps of rows. And then on day 3, let's say we do similar things like D1. Day 4, we do similar things like we did on D2. So we always have one harder day, then an easier day. So that will be like training every second day. Just demonstrating a few add-ons towards dynamic exercises. The main priority should be the direct holds, the static holds, but as an accessory, example, either instead of the easier progression or on the lighter day, you add a few of those. Let's say your regular progression is the 1 leg front lever, and on the lighter day you do, say, advanced tucked front lever raises, like initiating via the lats, via the shoulder girdle, raising up, hold, down, up, hold, and so on. Okay? For example, a progression where you can do 3 repetitions. Yeah, hopefully you liked my introductions towards the front lever. Let me know if you have questions, especially about planning and so on. I could make this video way longer, but simply let me know if you have questions, and then yeah, I will make comments about that. At the end, maybe showing again the front lever at the form how I like it. Also here, there is not that single one form which is always correct. It's a bit of an individual, but I can show you what's for me a good front lever and how I like to teach it.